8.6, Council Bill number 25-008, ordinance number 3079.
So move.
Second, Graham.
Go ahead, Chief.
Mayor, Council, Jeremy Sawyer, Police Chief. I wish I could say this is going to be shorter than the last one, but this one is longer than the last one. So we'll do our best to present it thoroughly without dragging it out any longer than it needs to be. This presentation is about the shopping cart containment and retrieval ordinance. Now, this is a new ordinance. However, it's only new for us. It's not something where we're reinventing the wheel. I'm not that creative. This is something that exists in over 100 other municipalities throughout the country. And there's also a state statute in Arizona that is very similar to how our ordinance is drafted. And just for reference, a list of other municipalities that already have an existing ordinance. About 40 of the 100 cities listed in this ordinance are in California, although there's cities throughout the country that are on this list. At this time, I'll have the city manager come up and go through the ordinance itself, and then I'll be talking about implementation if the ordinance did pass. I'm sorry, Brad, at least it was a promotion, not a demotion. Mayor, Council, I want to spend a little bit of time in talking about what implementation would look like if the ordinance did pass. And so we'll start with a 60-day period for businesses to kind of get their shopping cart plans together, submit those to community development for review, and then an additional 30 days for community development to review that plan once they receive it. At the same time that's occurring, a 60-day period would occur for education, where our officers and community advocates would go out into the community and talk to people, educate them about the new ordinance, and give them a specific date when enforcement would start. We also would work with communications at the city to put that information out through every available means. After the 60-day period, voluntary compliance is still the goal, and that is true for many of the things that we enforce. Enforcement, when done, will be conducted using a well-resourced and well-designed operation, and I'll talk more about that in a second. I want to spend just a minute talking about enforcement in general, because I do hear a lot of misconceptions about what enforcement looks like. Our officers, we deal with this day in and day out, so we're not talking about this conceptually. This is the reality of what happens in Doña Ana County. With very few exceptions, people do not go to jail for nonviolent misdemeanors, one of those exceptions being DWI. So generally, enforcement is done through a criminal citation or a criminal summons, in this case, into municipal court. Unless the person has an arrest warrant or they commit some other crime that's an arrestable offense, that person is not going to jail for a violation of this ordinance. And this is also an important note, is that patrol officers are not going to be able to stop and interact or deal with every person that has a shopping cart. That's unrealistic, and I just want that expectation set up front. It has to be done with well-resourced and a holistic operation that kind of addresses a lot of the concerns all at once. So what would that operation look like? Operations will be designed to be thoughtful and holistic, so we will partner with our community outreach officers, codes enforcement, our community advocates, and hopefully with our community partners, including Community of Hope Outreach if it passes, but also La Clinica de Familia, Amador Health Clinic, Peak Behavioral Health, similar to the outreach project we did on Boccaccio about a month ago, so that as we go and do these projects, we have the ability to offer specific resources to the people based on their individual needs. We also plan on providing alternate items to carry their essential property. I get that no matter what happens, the hardest part of this is what do you do at that point when you're dealing with someone with a shopping cart, especially if it's full of belongings and we're not talking about full of a trash bag with objective trash in it. So what do we do at that point? And so we would provide some mechanism, and I have some thoughts obviously that I can expand on, to carry that property, and then offer to keep any of the property they cannot carry for safekeeping up to 90 days, of course, free of charge. An important note is that a lot of times the property we see is not necessarily things they need to live day to day, but it's obviously things that are important to them that they don't want lost or stolen, and they have no other mechanism to store it, so they have to carry it with them everywhere they go. Reporting on operations. I commit that if the ordinance passes in 6 months or 6 months after implementation, I will report on any operations that are conducted and any enforcement action that's taken to City Council, obviously in a public forum, so that that's put out there. It was noted already by our city attorney, Mr. Douglas, the municipal court program is already trying to keep track of data, so when they come back and present, they can give us some information about the SOS program. I want to talk about additional property storage solutions, which I think are an important component of this ordinance. This is a shipping container, what we call a Connex box, it's a 40-foot shipping container. This could be a mechanism to offer long-term storage to people who don't have any other option than to carry all their stuff with them all the time. So what does that look like? On the inside of the shipping container, you line it with shelving. You have bins that are obviously numbered so that you have accountability and can track that property. How long it's stored for ultimately is going to be the decision of whoever is the person administering this program, whether it's 90 days, 180 days. The goal would be to store that property, and in the time it's stored, hopefully that person finds housing, and then they can come back and retrieve that property and not have to worry about it again. Couple options. One option would be to find a way to put it at the Community of Hope campus. That's where all the services are, and so it pulls the people to where the services are. I get that there's logistical challenges with that, and I've talked to Ms. Martinez, and I know that's not an easy thing to do. But ultimately, if it's not possible, if we cannot do it logistically at the Community of Hope, we will find an alternate location for the City of Las Cruces to have this service available. And this was already mentioned, but I just want to kind of highlight again the SOS program, because so far, although it's very early, there's a lot of positivity coming out of this program. And data is limited, but there's already been some success stories in such a short amount of time. People that we were citing 2 to 3 times a week for things like shoplifting that have only had one cite in the last month. And it's only been a month that the program's really been up and running. It's an important reminder too that as a condition of a deferred sentence or probation, people are ordered to do an assessment. Based on the assessment, they determine what are the best resources or treatment for that person. This is kind of general information about municipal court and the process of how it works. All defendants who cannot afford fines, and a lot of this has been mentioned, have the option of asking the judge to perform community service in lieu of paying the fines. And that's something that municipal court has been actively pursuing and trying to make sure that people are aware of and use it as an option. It's also important to note that community service by definition now, state level, can be treatment for substance abuse or substance use disorder or mental illness. A deferred sentence results in a dismissal if the conditions are met. Most of the time what's happening in municipal court, whether it's the officer or the city attorney's dealing with it, they offer a deferred sentence to the defendant. And basically what that says is if you meet these conditions at the end of it, that charge is dismissed and shows as a dismissal, not a conviction. That conviction goes away. And so using that opportunity to then make one of those conditions an assessment and treatment. And another thing I think that will help just across the board, not just with this ordinance or the previous one, is that the city attorney's office very soon, hopefully within the next 30 to 60 days, will be taking over all criminal cases and prosecuting them instead of the officer. There's a number of reasons why that's better, but one of them is that it guarantees a uniform response so that whatever the strategy is of the city and what we're trying to accomplish, we make sure that that's happening for every person who's involved in this program. And ultimately, if enforcement action is taken, it can be a pipeline to positive change. We see very often that the people who need help the most are the least likely to get help. That's what our officers see day in and day out. There may not be enough resources in Doña Ana County, but when I talk to a lot of our providers, all of them, I won't name them, none of them tell me they have zero capacity. Our ACT teams, there's 3 ACT teams in Doña Ana County, none of them are at capacity. So there may not be enough resources for what we would like and what we need, but there is some capacity that's already there for programs like this. This is a really important point I want to note. I mentioned 100 other municipalities that have an ordinance. Ours is the only one that puts it in the ordinance that the preference is for treatment and not fines or jail time. All the rest just leave it as a misdemeanor or their equivalent of a petty misdemeanor and note whatever the fines and jail time are that are associated with it. Ours specifically lays it out. Of course, the judges still have discretion, so we can't necessarily take that away from them, but it's spelled out right in front of them. Every judge, whether it's these judges or 5 years from now, this is the preference in the ordinance. I want to briefly just go back to what is the purpose of the ordinance. And I had slides with many photos that I've been sent. I took those out and we chose not to show that. I think we did that at the work session. We talked about it in other forums and other places. So I'm just going to highlight a few things some that I've already said, some that I haven't. but there's a number of reasons why this ordinance is important, and all of them are valid. One is that it does create a public health and public safety issue within our city, and we're seeing that grow. From the time this was presented to me by our community outreach officers over a year ago to now, that issue has grown in our city. We see blight, and it's ultimately become a public nuisance. And another point, which is important, is that it makes a bad situation in our city appear worse, and perception does matter. And when we're trying to get real change to happen, when either side's perception is off from reality, it's very difficult to make good decisions. And so when people see things like I'm going to show you just briefly, their thought is that there's 5, 10, 15 people that have an encampment, and the reality is it's one person. And that perception being off is not helpful to anybody. The most important point for me is that theft is a crime, and that's not something we gloss over. As soon as we justify and excuse any crime, we compromise the entire system. If theft is okay because of somebody's housing status or for any other reason, then why is shoplifting not okay? And if shoplifting is okay, why are other crimes down the line not okay? And logically, the end is that all crime is permissible as soon as we excuse any crime. There are several businesses with very few carts. That's happened, although that seems like a minor inconvenience. Of course, depends on the person's physical capabilities, whether not having a cart is that big of a deal. Another thing that we have seen is businesses are spending thousands and thousands of dollars a month to replace carts. The customer ultimately pays for that. And of course, the customers who have the least suffer the most from increased prices from spending all that money replacing carts. Shopping carts full of stuff limit the mobility of those who need services and their access to them. I'll show the video, but that's an important point. That doesn't affect every person who has a shopping cart, but it affects many people who have shopping carts. They have 4, 5, 10, 14 carts full of stuff that is very important to them, even if it's objectively trash, and they're not willing to walk a mile or 2 miles to where the services are because they can't leave that stuff. It becomes an anchor. And of course, shopping carts full of trash and debris do create a public health challenge. So as an example, obviously this is a public health challenge to anyone who's around this cart, but also the public at large. So how bad is the problem? I've shown this before. On the left is the amount of resources it took to clean this up. This is a combination of our community outreach officers, some city workers, and Mano a Mano, which has been a fantastic program. And that's the other side of this, to look at our successes, and I agree 100% that Mano a Mano has been great for everybody. This is a video of one person and the carts that they had. And I'll just tell you, there's 14 carts there. Most of them are full of what would be objectively trash. Now, to this person, of course, it's not necessarily trash. It's just an extension of the mental illness that they're suffering from that's untreated, and or their substance use. But it ultimately becomes an anchor where they can't get to the services they need. This one example highlights basically all the points I made before about why this ordinance is important, all in one person. Now, this was probably about a year ago now. And I just want to highlight this. This is the same person about 2 weeks ago. They still have not gotten help. They're still dealing with the same issues that they were dealing with over a year ago. And we still have the same problems with the public health issues it presents, the perception issues. When someone walks by this and sees this, they don't think it's one person suffering from mental illness. They see this as a bigger problem than just one person. This is the same person as well, 2 weeks ago. I'm coming to the end, I promise. I just want to highlight a couple things about what the community as a whole is seeing. I think we get stuck in our silos a little bit. We hear our echo chambers. I just want to put out some objective information that we've collected in the past month and a half. In 2019, right after peak, we put out a public safety survey, and a company administered that survey. We got those results, and we just repeated that survey within the last few months, word for word, every question, identical survey. And we'll release all the results soon, but I want to highlight just a few comparisons. This question is, please rate how important, if at all, you think it is for the Las Cruces community to focus on the overall feeling of safety in Las Cruces in the coming 2 years. In 2019, 85% people said it's very important to focus on the overall feeling of safety the next 2 years. In 2024, 93% said it's very important. This question was, please indicate whether or not you have experienced the following in the last 12 months. The first one, we'll go with the yellow bar, reported a crime to the police in Las Cruces in the last 12 months. In 2019, 83% had reported a crime in the last 12 months. In 2024, 90% had reported a crime in the last 12 months. The next question is, household member was a victim of crime in Las Cruces in the last 12 months. In 2019, 36% had a household member who was a victim of crime within the last year. In 2024, it was 45%. A few other comparisons. This question was, in the last 12 months, how many conversations have you had with your neighbors about neighborhood safety? And I'll highlight the extremes. In 2019, 40% said none. In 2024, only 20% said none. On the other end, in 2019, 3.1% had more than 12 conversations within a year with their neighbors about safety. In 2024, 20% had 12 or more conversations with their neighbors about safety. The last one from this survey is, how many interactions did you have with police officers during the past year? Again, I'll just highlight the extremes. In 2019, 45% had no interactions. In 2024, 25% had no interactions. In 2019, 2.2% had 10 or more interactions in a year. In 2024, 5% had 10 or more interactions in a year. And if you look at every category other than 0 in 2024, it has increased. The final thing is our Power Engage survey. This is part of our customer service text-based software. So when people call for any number of reasons, found property, stolen vehicle, burglary, they get a survey at the end. It asks them to rate how well the officer did, give comments, and then we ask, do you support the updates for the City of Las Cruces ordinances, which is all of them that we just went over, including this one. There's 315 responses, 90% said yes, 10% said no. Again, I think it's important to set realistic expectations regardless of where you fall on this issue. No matter what happens, you're still going to see people with carts. Officers are not going to be able to stop and deal with every person who has a cart. We have to have the resources in place. We have to have the time to deal with it appropriately. We can't just stop, dump out their items, cite them, and move on. That's not what's going to occur. This is about taking a problem and making it better, making it manageable with both sides, the business side and the other side. Some final thoughts. Again, we are dealing with something that is criminal theft. We are dealing with something that causes public safety and public health challenges and problems. And ultimately, this ordinance can be something that connects people to treatment, even when it's not something they want to choose on their own. With that, we'll both stand for questions.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief. Councilor Flores.
Thank you.